So we are in Book 1 of the Yoga Sutras, also known as Section 1, which is known primarily as the portion on Samadhi, the Samadhipada, and Bailey has called it the problem of union. And we've talked about these distinctions and titles in previous videos. If you haven't watched the previous videos to this one, I recommend that you do. It sets things up for our in-depth understanding of the sutras in Section 1. Now we're going to start with stanza 1 and do the overview, starting out with the Sanskrit words. And I'm going to start by using the word Om, and I'll explain why a little later in this video. Here we go. Om Ata Yoga Nushasanam. One more time. Om Ata Yoga Nushasanam. And I'm relying upon my pronunciation of the Sanskrit by following somebody that I have studied his Yoga Sutras course. His name is Swami Tadatmananda. He's part of the Arshabodha Center in New Jersey. And the reason why I'm not commenting on his course is because it's a very lengthy audio course and not a book that I can easily take stuff from. So you will hear me use him as the reference for how to say these words, but in general, I will not be commenting on his audio lectures. They're very long, very worthwhile if you want to go undertake the study of it yourself. So, Ata, now. Yoga means yoga. Anushasanam, exposition or instruction. And there are many different ways, as we're going to see, to interpret what these Sanskrit words mean. And I'm not here to get really picky on that. I recommend the Arshabodha Center because he teaches Sanskrit as well if you really want to get into that debate on exactly what the meaning is of these particular Sanskrit phrases. Now, Bailey's interpretation is a little different. Here we see what she calls the AUM or the Om. And the reason why we're saying the Om is because it is traditional in these Vedanta schools to start with the Om. But Bailey then says the following instruction concerns the science of union. And we'll get into an understanding of this a little later. But in general, I just wanted to show you that she uses the Om in the beginning of her interpretation of what this means. Now, we will see that her interpretation, the following instruction concerns the science of union, is different than how our other authors in this series are talking about it. Now, in these videos, I'm not always going to be taking these books in order. I'm going to be putting them in the order of certain quotes out of the books and their interpretation of the different sutras or stanzas that struck me as really important. Some of them in the different books get a little redundant in what they're saying, so I'm just pulling out the highlights that I felt were really necessary for us to understand this sutra. And the very first one that is emphasized a lot by Swami Satchidananda is that this is not about an intellectual study. This is about practicing what we're going through here. That's the real difference. He says, quote, not mere, but rather direct instruction on how to practice yoga. And as we go through this series, I'm going to be encouraging you to do the practice itself. Again, one of the major problems with those who follow theosophical teachings, including Bailey, is that the emphasis is primarily on intellectual knowledge and understanding. This is one of the real problems in a lot of these groups, too, is they're not busy applying the knowledge to transform themselves into becoming more spiritual. I've been guilty of that myself, but I adjusted in my later years. Yet just as we cannot lose weight by reading lots of diet books, this is me talking here. When it's a quote from the books and they're talking, you will see me put it in quotes. This is my commentary. Just as we cannot lose weight by reading lots of diet books, we cannot become spiritual by studying and talking about philosophical ideas and what is written in books. And Swami Satchidananda, in his larger discussion, is basically saying something similar to what I am here. The yoga teachings and philosophy are about practice. And though there is much to learn, it is useless if not implemented to help us become the soul and spirit that we are. And in a way, saying become is a little bit of a problem, because what we're really doing in the Yoga Sutras is we're uncovering who we really are. We're not really becoming it. We're realizing or discovering the self that we always are, the spirit that we always are here. But it seems like we're becoming something different than we are here. So now we're going to pull out some quotes from Iyengar's discussion of this stanza 1 or Sutra 1. And this is a quote from him. With prayers for divine blessings, now begins an exposition of the sacred art of yoga. This is how he is translating the Sanskrit. And I'm not going to do this all the time, but I want you to see a section that comes out of Iyengar's book where he is doing all kinds of different words that are showing what the Sanskrit word might mean. So with ata, we have now, auspiciousness, a prayer, a blessing, benediction, authority, a good omen, etc., etc. And you can pause the video if you want to read this, and better yet, you can buy the book. Now, this is my commentary regarding the word ata. In a review of popular videos on the internet, I was discovering that many people are claiming that ata, or now, means we need to get into the here and now. It's like they've read a lot of Eckhart Tolle books or something. But in researching texts by authors I respect, I did not find any references to ata being a period of time, like we need to get into the now. Rather, it is almost like we need to say and now to really get the meaning of the Sanskrit word here. And we're going to talk about that more momentarily. Let's go on with a few more quotes from Iyengar. He goes on to emphasize the word now is a reference to Patanjali's previous works, including his treatises on Sanskrit grammar and on Ayurveda. And that's a lot of what I was seeing in the different authors that I really were respecting here. And now, which leads us to the question of what was before now. And this is what Iyengar is asserting. It means this is the next in a series of instructions. First was grammar, Ayurveda, or maybe it was Ayurveda and then grammar. And now we're going to talk about basically meditation, or the Yoga Sutras. This is something we also discussed in introductory videos when we looked a little bit at who Patanjali was. Iyengar also emphasizes that we are attempting the, quote, recognition of that hidden part of man which is beyond the awareness of the senses. We're moving from the outer world of the five senses to the inner world, not just of the mind, but in general of who we really are, the self that we are realizing or discovering. This is why we need to thoroughly understand samadhi and how it works, because the preliminary instructions to samadhi involve thinking, concentrated, focused thinking. But to really discover the self that we are, the spirit I call it, we must go beyond thought. Now we're going to go a little bit into what I got from Taimni. He essentially concurs with Swami Satchidananda and Iyengar in what he writes on this sutra. I would like to add, however, some interesting additional points from him. 1. He lets us know a little bit more about Patanjali, who many consider to be the author of the Yoga Sutras, indicating that some believe that he was, quote, from Taimni, the same person who was known as Govinda Yogi and who initiated Samkaracharya, end of quote. Now, Samkaracharya is essentially the main teacher of the lineage known later as Vedanta, and we're going to talk about that again shortly. Taimni also makes a comment on how the sutras, or he calls them sutram, essentially are aphorisms that thread together in concise language the technique of yoga, which is not hatha yoga, it is not the postures, it involves the meditation practice. Finally, he discusses the problem of interpreting the sutras correctly, especially when we attempt to translate the Sanskrit they are written in into different languages. And he emphasizes that unless we understand the patterns of thought behind these sutras, I really like that. We don't come, I'm speaking English, we don't come from India immersed in Sanskrit, especially the ancient Sanskrit. So it's difficult for us to really know what's the context around something. This is why some people are now saying now means be in the now instead of the context that might be important in terms of the patterns of thought that were originating the language. He also says that yogic and Vedanta philosophy are important for us to understand if we're going to try and capture the meaning of the words here. And as we will see, this difficulty in interpreting the Sanskrit and its true context or meaning or pattern of thought is a problem that Bailey had when we get into the Bailey books. And that's something that I'll be helping you understand throughout this training. Now we're going to look briefly at some things that I saw from Swami Vivekananda, which is basically nothing. He has no commentary on this sutra at all. He didn't feel that it was necessary. But though Vivekananda has no commentary on this sutra, I would like to share a little bit about him and why I picked his book. Vivekananda was a direct disciple of somebody known as Ramakrishna, who is considered by many to be an enlightened master. Now, the Gospel of Ramakrishna, which I have read some of, I hope one day to finish it. Maybe I will by the time we get to the end of this yoga series on the Yoga Sutras. That Gospel shares about the life of Ramakrishna and his teachings. And from an early age, Ramakrishna immersed himself in the practices of many of the world's major faith traditions. It's really fascinating when you read about that. I mean, he dropped everything he knew about one religion and immersed himself in the other religion as if he didn't know the religion before. And then once he had thoroughly practiced Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, etc., he then started a synthesis of understanding, not of his intellectual understanding, but of his experiential understanding of these different faiths. Now notice the word practices and not teachings. And one of the things that Ramakrishna mastered was, I'm calling it the technique of samadhi. But in a way, that's an unfortunate choice of words I'm using here, because samadhi isn't really something that you do. You can do the preliminaries that get you there, but samadhi is like a state that you enter into because you've done the preliminary practices. It allows you to enter into that state. But it's not like I'm now going to do samadhi, boom, type of thing. It's more, I've done so much of the preparation and so much of the practices that now I am able to enter that samadhi state, to realize the self that I am increasingly at all times. Because Vivekananda was a direct disciple of this living master, as many people consider Ramakrishna to be, and was trained by him, I'm going to use his commentary. Vivekananda was also the first person to bridge yoga philosophy into the West. He was also part of the lineage known as Vedanta, and those who understand Vedanta can clearly see the connections of these teachings in Indian philosophy with Theosophy, and that includes Blavatsky and Bailey. One of the key texts in the actual training in the Bailey books is the foundational text, one of the foundational texts for Vedanta, the Yoga Sutras. Now we come to Bailey's interpretation, and notice that by now I don't mean be in the present moment, I mean and now. And her interpretation is, here's a quote, Om, the following instruction concerns the science of union. My commentary again. Now, we might ask why Bailey starts with the Om when no one else does, and I've already referred to this a little bit in that it is considered traditional to add that in before we study this text. Next, Bailey emphasizes that yoga is about the science of union. True, the word yoga infers there is a union, but the main problem with Bailey's commentary is that she is talking about union with the soul or ego, when, as we will see, the Yoga Sutras really are referring to a union with what we would call spirit on the soul to spirit channel, or what in the Bailey model we might call the true self or triad. So you should already be a little bit familiar with this model from previous videos, or you're going to start to feel lost. But this is what Bailey means by the soul. It's right here. This is the triad, which is Atma Buddhi Manas or Sat Chit Ananda, as it's known in traditional yogic philosophy teachings. So Bailey's text is essentially saying that we're trying to become the soul-infused personality. Here's the personality here. We have in her text the coordinated personality here, and then the integrated personality here, and then the soul-infused personality here. But that's not where the Yoga Sutras is taking us. That's where the initial training in the Yoga Sutras takes us, but the advanced training takes us up here into the triad. Let's go back to what she has said here, because she mentions that the Yoga Sutras show us how to take the third initiation, where the personality becomes soul infused. Again, that only takes us up here. That's limited. We're really trying to get up here. But she does say that, quote, the union to be achieved is that of the third and second aspects. The third is the personality, the second is the soul, and this is consummated at the third initiation in Christian terminology, the transfiguration. Again, this is not correct. As we see in our study, the sutras lead us to the fifth initiation. The fourth initiation is where this causal body, soul body is destroyed, which in previous videos we've talked about, is because the sense of I am doing this, whether it's the soul-infused personality or the integrated personality, the coordinated personality, that I is destroyed. That's what it means when we take the fourth initiation. We're destroying that. We'll see how that works throughout this Yoga Sutra series, so that we can become the triad, which is where the fifth initiation is up here on the Buddhic plane. So that's our overall understanding of this particular stanza as we get started. Again, remember, this is a practice. I'm going to emphasize this practice. I want you to start to get the idea that this is about changing who we are so that we realize the self that we are.